Live. What's up, everybody? It's G Mr. Drew here to welcome you to another episode of the Andrew Glowczewski Experience. It's going to be episode 226. Going to continue the character portrait we started yesterday, doing some pencils. I only have a little bit of time, so I'll probably just be inking on this one. It'll probably be another short episode, but hey, it is what it is. Today's date is August 14th. So if you are watching this on YouTube, you're watching an old video at a later time. And yeah, man, if you want to catch these things live, man, just watch. You can catch me on Twitch. If you don't have a Twitch account, you can watch them on Patreon. We'll have to be a patron in order to watch them, but those are only starting off at $1, and starting at $3, you can get commissions and things like that from me. So that sounds interesting to you to get some custom artwork, traditional, digital, all that stuff, man. Holler. Other than that, I got YouTube playing in the background, some Star Wars Bad Batch stuff, and then Super Eye Patch Wolf talking about a manga, a fighting manga, and then maybe some Berserk stuff if we get around to it, and then just Venom and like Batman vigilante stuff and all that. I doubt the video will go on until we get to those videos, so who cares? But I got all that stuff playing in the background, and yeah, man, let's just get into it.
Value as soldiers. Now they find themselves in the same space, proving that they have value as free men. Crosshair says, which felt like a callback to this. You will not eat them. And then, seems like a callback to the line of all ship-activated clones.
What's going on here?
We're loyal to each other, not some empire. You weren't loyal to me.
Crosshair's right. They never made a point to go after him. They saved Echo, Omega, Hunter, even Wrecker, but left Crosshair out to dry. To save the batch, Omega activates the training droids. Now notice they are early models of
I feel like my microphone's getting in the way, or maybe it's just the camera armature. I got like no room to draw here.
Philosophical battle distills the point of the show.
There we go.
And this is what finally tells us Crosshair's motivation. He sees himself as more than, while the rest of the batch think of themselves as defective.
Let's see if this works.
Under the control of the Empire, more like he's assisting it. He thinks the galaxy needs to be controlled and can't do it without elite soldiers like him and the Bad Batch helping him.
This is what we were made for.
Here, Crosshair is speaking about a purpose assigned to the Bad Batch. They were built to kill and destroy, but all season long, they've been discovering their own purpose, to live free and normal lives, though at one point they were imprisoned by the constraints of capitalism.
Now, I like you boys, but I'm not running a charity here.
Capitalism sucks, right? This...
Loving you.
Oh, your dog. What's his name?
Zell.
Why Zell?
Because Zell's a great way to send money to friends and family, pretty much wherever they bank.
Who's a good Zell?
Zell, look forward in your banking app.
Become my enemy.
felt like a poetry rhymey moment with this one.
If you're not with me, then you're my enemy.
And Hunter's line here
You really don't get who we are, do you?
is because the Bad Batch have always been apart from the regular army. They're the offshoots, the rejects, who make up their own lines. And then we see what the Empire really thinks of clones when they unload on the facility. Tarkin's line is, of course, a nod to this.
You may fire when ready.
And the visual of the rest of the fleet emerging from the clouds is reminiscent of the Emperor's super secret mystery fleet in The Rise of Skywalker. It's pretty ingenious what the Empire's done here. They've cornered the market on cloning technology, which the Emperor can then use to clone himself in 50 years. It also explains why we don't see more clones running around in the original trilogy, and why the Clone Wars seem so strange and mysterious to youngsters like Luke. So let's talk about this reveal.
I had my chip removed a long time ago.
I agree with Hunter when he says this.
Since when? Doesn't matter. Yes.
Yeah, it does matter. It very, very much matters.
It matters.
He has no scar on his temple, so he may be blind, or maybe he only thinks that it was removed. But also, that means that in the first episode, he blindly obeyed orders to kill a child.
Good soldiers follow orders.
And if he got the chip removed a long time ago, why not tell the other Bad Batch members about it? So I think it's more likely that he had it removed after the Empire had activated it. Maybe because he believes that he's superior to the others and he wanted to assert his free will. What matters most is now he doesn't have a chip and he still chooses to serve the Empire. And now let's talk about the finale of Season 1, Camino Lost. Now there aren't as many Easter eggs in this episode, though I think it's far and away the best episode of the season, and one of the best episodes of Star Wars that I've ever seen. This is the happiest moment of my life. The visuals are stunning, it's suspenseful, and there are real character stakes.
You offered us a chance, Crosshair. This is yours. I made my decision.
There's also just enough big reveals
Omega was created before us. Technically, she is older than we are.
while still teasing other mysteries, like what makes Omega so special. Great episode, 10 out of 10, let's move on. When this clone tells Rampart about the destruction of Camino,
The cities have been destroyed, sir. All Kaminoan facilities have collapsed into the sea.
you can hear just a little bit of pain in his voice, like he's sorry to see his home go away. This season, we're starting to see other clones break from their ranks, despite their control chips.
But look around you. You're now being ordered to target the very people we swore to protect.
I think the chips are mostly a safeguard against the Jedi, and now you're going to see more clones abandon the Empire in Season 2. AZ is the real hero of this episode, and personally, I'm really glad the droid is going to stick around. In fact, I just realized watching this episode that his name, AZ, is very similar to Alpha and Omega, the code names given to Boba Fett and Omega, the first and last clones.
To my knowledge, there's only one other. A male clone, codenamed Alpha, later referred to as Boba.
This show has a running theme about beginnings and endings. The Republic ends, the Empire begins, the Clone War ends, the Rebellion begins, etc. I like that we got more of Omega and Crosshair together in this episode. In fact, if he's going to hunt them in Season 2, then he should have a personal connection to the entire team. But remember, she could also sense his emotions back in Episode 1.
You were angry.
How perceptive.
At the time, I thought this was because she's Force sensitive, and maybe she is. But now I'm thinking this was because she knows the Bad Batch better than they know themselves. She was there when they were zygotes. Like Jeremiah 11 says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. So this whole time, we thought that Omega was kind of like their kid sister. But along the way, she's become more like their mother.
I keep an eye on my brothers. They need it.
They escape past the hallway where Obi-Wan first saw the growth cloning chambers. For all of you who grew up with the prequels, I'm sure this was an emotional episode. The whole sequence was just beautiful. Camino's always been a symbolic location, showing a hierarchy of order above an ocean of roiling emotions. You could say that it was a metaphor for Anakin trying to control his emotions in Attack of the Clones.
It's all Obi-Wan's fault. He's jealous. He's holding me back.
Or of the dark side forces on the underside controlling the Republic. Now, it's all junk. Useless after the Empire stripped it for parts.
You should have killed me.
Would have been a waste of parts.
The series comes full circle with Crosshair and Hunter arguing
Would have
over
been a
leadership
waste of
in both the first
parts.
and last episodes.
They sent us to eliminate innocent civilians.
Who said they're innocent?
What's wrong with you? Me? I'm following orders.
Just following orders.
Blind allegiance makes you a pawn. A real leader protects his squad.
Look where that's gotten you.
And this was a key line for the series.
Crosshair has always been severe and unyielding. It is his nature. You cannot change that. He cannot change that.
This show is all about individuality. Do we have free will, or are we prisoners of our own genetic programming? Is it Crosshair's nature that decided to throw in with the Empire, or is he his own man? See, I'm bummed they glossed over that control chip line last episode.
I had my chip removed a long time ago.
Because knowing when he lost his chip would tell us a lot about his values and who he is. They end up back at Nala Se's private lab. Again, appropriate that at the end they all return to the place where they began. Alpha and Omega. Speaking of Alpha, in a Clone Wars comic, we did see that this pod is where they kept your mom. Hunter tells him.
All you'll ever be to them is a number.
Because clones gave themselves their nicknames, not the Republic commands.
Conflict, just relay orders. We all heard the orders, Echo. Stop calling and stop repeating every order.
50 years later, we'll see the same idea come to fruition with Finn.
What's your name? FN2187. What? That's the only name they ever gave me.
So AZ is high in the running for my favorite character in the show.
Your safety and well-being is my primary mission objective.
Droids are wonderful. I was devastated when I thought he was going to get the Jack Dawson treatment. And then
I wasn't so lucky. Invisalign.
proves why she's the heart of the team, risking her life for an appliance.
I'm going after Rising.
And then the team once again have to leave.
Hey, thank you.
Then we get this teaser ending. The channel heavy spoilers theorize that this planet.
I don't even know how to pronounce that. Palvalant? Palvalant?
Nala Stay is now essentially a prisoner of the Empire.
Palvalant.
They did something similar to Galen
But thank
Erso
you.
in Rogue One, forcing him to spend decades.
Yeah,
creating the Death Star and
this is gonna be a
Still,
quick stream. I'm
except
just
in
getting a
this
little bit of
case,
inking
Nala
in.
Stay is likely helping to create a Force-sensitive clone of Emperor Palpatine. Because I guess all Star
And then,
Wars is
maybe
known
tomorrow
for
I'll
making dumb decisions to bring
be able
back
to
the Rise of Skywalker.
color it and all that other stuff.
Like J.J. Abrams explained here. So I told Chris Terrio, I said, hey, don't worry about how Palpatine comes back. Someone's gonna cover that like a comic book or a TV show on Disney Plus. It'll be fine. Now pound that keyboard. I need pages. Now, obviously, that was not the real J.J. Abrams, but I'm sure that's what they all said at the time. The person who greets Nala Se has a Kaminoan patch on her arm, just like Dr. Pershing in The Mandalorian. He was trying to take a sample of Grogu's blood for some kind of unrevealed cloning project.
We have exhausted our initial supply of blood. The child is small and I was only able to harvest a limited amount.
So I'm going to throw this theory out there. The Star Wars galaxy operates with different guilds controlling aspects of the economy, kind of like the Middle Ages in Europe. There's a scrapper guild, a bounty hunter guild, etc.
They just don't want to pay guild rates.
So what if this isn't the Kaminoan symbol, it's the symbol of the Genetic Engineers Guild? This would explain why a human is wearing this patch at the end of the episode. But that's all the Easter egg that I found. If you found it, let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.
Was wild. This was a night when a group of weirdos entered a steel cage with the purpose of answering one question. What was the most effective way to disable another human with your bare hands? One fighter was a 400-pound sumo wrestler, another a professional ranked boxer who fought bizarrely with a single glove. There were karate experts, pro wrestlers, street fighters, and the idea that they were all going to be allowed to just fight with no rules, no round time, and no weight limit was insane, to the point that some of the fighters themselves were convinced that this was a scripted pro wrestling style show. A delusion that came crashing down when 14 seconds into the first round, a Dutch Savate fighter's kick exploded across the face of a giant, obliterating everything we thought we knew about fighting. That shock building with each captivating and brutal match that followed. But the biggest surprise of the night came when the entire tournament was won by its smallest competitor. A quiet, softly spoken man who had somehow been declared the ultimate fighting champion and yet had barely thrown a single punch or kick. And maybe you don't care about fighting. Maybe this all seems very brutal and very unnecessary. Well, you are who I'm making this video for. See, something amazing happened here tonight. And if I can do the next 20 minutes right, you'll understand not only what that is, but why it matters in recommending an obscure 2000 movie. But first, a brief word from our sponsor. Day of the Dead, They Live, Tokyo Revengers, One Piece Stampede, Laid Back Camp, weird Resident Evil CG movies, like 50 Crayon Shin-chan movies, Keep Your Hands Up, Eizouken, and Puppet Master, The Littlest Reich, which may or may not be a film about Nazi puppets. These are just a fraction of the titles available on Netflix, but not the US version. See, streaming service geolocking has gotten so bad that there's now entire websites dedicated to showing you what's in different countries' Netflix
Commercials.
releases. And to access these forbidden titles, I like to use ExpressVPN,
Get out of here.
an app that works on any of my devices. Getting the shit beaten out of her, but in doing so, gradually.
Okay, let's get back.
expressvpn.com/iPatchWolf and find out how you can get 3 months of ExpressVPN free. Okay, fighting. Yuzuko Motari has just transferred to a Japanese high school. Having grown up in Brazil, where she spent her early years, well, getting the shit beaten out of her, but in doing so, gradually learning the arts of striking, grappling, and submission. That training manifesting in her love of mixed martial arts. A love she now wants to share with her fellow students through her newly established MMA club. Yuzuko is a delight. She's kind of like a puppy if that puppy was really into UFC and could rip out your shoulder with an armbar. And the exact kind of hero you'd expect from a shonen manga like Tepu. Only this is not our protagonist. Natsuo Oshido is a nightmare. At nearly 6 foot tall, she towers over the rest of her school, but not just in height. Since she was a child, she's only needed to see an action performed once or twice to be able to replicate it perfectly. Meaning, whether it's karate, basketball, or volleyball, she's an elite physical genius that effortlessly surpasses everyone around her.
She's
That
Taskmaster.
genius has isolated her from her peers and even her own family, envious and disdainful of her God-given abilities. But that's a hatred she's learned to revel in. Her cold, callous nature taking joy in challenging what she sees as regular, untalented people and showing them that all their practice, all their hard work, and all their training are dust in the wake of her natural sadistic genius. In any other series, this would be our villain, but in Tepu, this is our protagonist. The story beginning when Yuzuko, unaware of who and what Natsuo is, invites her to join the Mixed Martial Arts Club. Natsuo taking this as an opportunity to humiliate the tiny fighter. But that's when she collides with something she's never encountered. A person she cannot dominate with raw talents. And as she stumbles away from the fight, blood dripping from her nose, she's filled with a single obsessive desire. Learn everything she can about mixed martial arts and use it to destroy music. Tepu is the story of these two characters and the dynamic that forms between them, told through fighting. And I love fighting. I've been doing martial arts most of my life to the point that I now have the combat ability of 2.5 regular people or 18 small children. But I have previously stated on this channel that I'm about as violent as a small tortoise wearing a little cotton hat. And the reason both those statements can be true is, to me, fighting does not equal violence. And what's so compelling about the setup of Tepu is how those two different concepts are embodied by these two characters. To me, there is nothing violent about two consenting people helping each other to get stronger through friendly competition. That is the core of what fighting in martial arts is to me, and also to Yuzuko. For her, MMA is not about surpassing other people or proving your own superiority. It's about focusing on yourself and gradually getting better at something you love, even if you have zero talent in that something. Yuzuko initially having to perform even the simplest actions dozens of times before she starts to understand the techniques. But that lack of talent is important, as it creates a space in which her personal journey of growth can happen. Victory or defeat not being the purpose of that journey, but just a byproduct of it. With that in mind, take a look at this. This is not fighting. This is two people who have lost control of their day, and the random, ridiculous flailing of their bodies is a result of that. The goal here isn't to better yourself or your own growth, but hurting another person with the intention of exerting your own dominance. That's violence, and that's what Natsuo embodies. Violence has become a way to hurt those who have hurt her, initially using her talents to take revenge on the bullies tormenting her brother, but eventually even turning on her own friends, like Sane, the captain of the karate club who embarrassed Natsuo's brother spar, only to be crushed by Natsuo in front of her entire class. However, rather than Natsuo's brother being grateful for this, he's humiliated at the thought of his little sister protecting him, and an insidious envy begins to creep into their relationship as Natsuo's brother grows cold and abusive. And as much of a nightmare as she can be, it is kind of devastating watching her crumble in the face of her brother's hatred. Never wanting to feel the pain of that rejection again, violence has become Natsuo's way of isolating everyone around her, the only threat to that isolation being Yuzuko. Natsuo having grown so twisted that she actually envies Yuzuko's lack of talent. She sees how fulfilled the smaller fighter is and the relationships her journey have helped her build, and it maddens Natsuo. It highlights every failing of her own life, but worse, she can't even deal with the problem the only way she knows how: violence. Yuzuko's years of training meaning Natsuo is completely outmatched by the smaller fighter. And not only is this idea at the core of Teppu's story, but it's also what's great about martial arts. Martial arts have never been a way for the elite to get stronger, they're a way for the weak to rise up. And one of the best examples of this comes in the form of my personal favorite martial art, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And if you think this entire video is just an excuse for me to talk about how cool I think Jiu-Jitsu is, only a little. Its origins go way back to the Edo era, a set of throws and grapples that samurai could fall back on if they lost their sword during combat. And it survived right up into modern times when, in the 20th century, a wandering fighter named Mitsuyo Maeda traveled to Brazil on a series of challenge matches, where he befriended a Brazilian family, teaching the sons of the family the art of grappling. However, one son was excluded from the training, the sickly, frail Halio. This dude was so weak that he couldn't even run up a flight of stairs without losing his breath. But in secret, his brothers taught him what they had learned, and Halio began to develop a modified style of jiu-jitsu, one that shaved off every excessive movement and strenuous motion, so that even the weakest person could use it to overcome larger, stronger opponents. And it did this by focusing not on traditional punches or kicks, but by dragging your opponent to the ground, then twisting and choking them into submission. And if you want to see just how effective this new Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was, then just look at the night of November 12th, 1993, where the first Ultimate Fighting Championship was won by the 176-pound softly spoken Hoisei Gracie, who, through Jiu-Jitsu, tapped out each of his much bigger, stronger opponents, changing the world of fighting forever. Hoisei being the son of Halio Gracie. At its heart, Jiu-Jitsu is about overcoming things that are bigger than you. That's why it's a fighting style that makes so much sense for a character like Yuzuko, someone with no natural advantages beyond her own desire to grow. But this also gives her fights a totally different dynamic than the brutal long-range strikes of Natsuo or the full-contact karate of Sane, in that Yuzuko has to rely on grappling, and this introduces something really unique and special into the fights of Tekken. Despite the massive shift grappling has caused in modern martial arts, you still don't see a lot of it in anime or manga outside one or two speciality characters. And this is likely because grappling is simultaneously less visually dramatic than punches and kicks, but also much harder to decode without experience. And Teppu solves this problem beautifully. And to see how, let's first look at how Teppu creates movement in its panels. Everyone's familiar with the idea of motion lines in comics. It's a simple way to carve out a path of action and, for the purposes of fighting, create big moments of singular impact. But what's so cool about how Teppu does this is it rarely uses one big motion line, but instead multiple smaller crescent-shaped motion streaks to communicate these subtle, intricate mechanics of a fight. Take this panel. The twist of a leg as it sends force shooting up the body, resulting in the vicious arc of a foot cutting skyward, the split-second pivot of an ankle creating a chain reaction as an entire body spins backward to avoid that initial attack. It's awesome, but when these motion streaks are applied to grappling, the panels take take on a nearly instructional quality. Here we can see how Yuzuko has kicked her left leg off the ground, using that momentum to create a rotation that spirals through her hips, hands, and shoulders, causing a massive centrifugal force through her entire body that she's using to snatch the arm of her much bigger, stronger opponents. And by contrast, look at how much less information we can decipher if we take away those motion streaks. The beautiful thing about this isn't just that it looks fucking awesome, but that it makes grappling make sense. When I first read Tepu, I spent about 10 years learning to strike. Grappling was a weird and honestly kind of scary concept to me. But it's panels like these that made me feel like, oh, I kind of get how this could work. Tepu taking the time to explain these subtle intricacies of techniques as well as specific fight scenarios. I remember first reading Tepu and seeing Natsuo get caught in a spider guard. Basically a move where your opponent grabs your sleeves and jams their foot into your elbow, turning you into this weird meat puppet. It doesn't really hurt, but you have to spend massive amounts of energy just to stay upright, while your opponent can just lie back and wait for their opportunity to sweep. Then, years later, one of the many times I got my ass kicked in jiu-jitsu was by being caught in this exact scenario. And as my face plummeted towards the mat, all I could think was, wow, this is just like that manga I read. And I would later discover on my reread of Tepu, there was even a full-on explanation of how to escape the spider guard. This kind of real-life recognition happened so often during my reread of Tepu, I have to believe that Noria Ota, Tepu's author, has some real-life experience with martial arts, but unfortunately, dude's kind of a ghost online. Aside from a few details we'll get into later, the only thing I could dig up about him was a single interview, as well as this photo from a 2013 blog post where he shows up at a women's MMA event. But whatever the connection is, his drawings show a genuine understanding of what makes these techniques work and how to apply them. And that insight was a huge part of what first opened me up to grappling and eventually led to me taking up jiu-jitsu in 2019. That ended up becoming this super positive force in my life. When I first took up jiu-jitsu, I was not in a good place. But fighting became this tool to help me rise out of that. I've spent a lot of time thinking about why this is when non-combat sports tend to do very little for me, and the best way I can describe it is that if you play a game of tennis, the worst reasonable outcome is that you lose that game of tennis. But with fighting, you could get beat up or choked out or any number of painful, unpleasant things. But that kicks a part of your brain into this survival mode that shuts everything else out. You cannot worry about if you're shit at making anime videos when a large Brazilian man is trying to choke you. And yeah, it's scary, especially in the beginning, but there's also tremendous freedom that comes with existing in only that moment. As your entire world becomes just you and your opponent, and all that anxiety, all the aggression that you might feel towards other people or yourself, it forces it all into perspective, lets you rise past it. And the beautiful thing about Tepu is that it captures that. It shows you the effect fighting has on the lives of each different character. For some, fighting becomes a way of pushing back against societal boundaries. The real struggle not being against any one opponent, but the perception that fighting is not a woman's activity. And as a side note, fuck that. I don't see fighting as masculine or feminine, and if you're a girl watching this and have ever wanted to try fighting for self-defense or fitness or the weird emotional stuff we just talked about, find a decent gym and just try it. The world needs more women fighters. For others like Yuzuko, we come to learn that she doesn't really experience emotion in the same way that other people do, and fighting has become her way of connecting with those around her. And I get that. There is a strange intimacy to fighting that is hard to explain if you've never experienced it. It's like when you fight someone, you experience them in a way that not even their closest friends or families do. And through that experience, you begin to get this really raw sense of who they are, their strengths, their fears, if they're willing to take risks, or how they handle failure. And in that same way, those aspects of yourself are laid bare as well. And so for someone like Yuzuko, fighting becomes an answer to loneliness. The person that fighting affects respects most, however, is Natsuo. This is why I think she makes such an interesting main character. Because she starts from such a flawed, broken place, we get to see the journey that fighting takes her on. And where this really becomes apparent is in one of the final fights of the entire series, where Natsuo faces her former friend, Sane. At this point in the story, Sane has hardened every part of herself, becoming the physical embodiment of all Natsuo's sins. Everyone she's hurt, all the talentless people she stepped on. What's incredible is how the opening action of this fight just seeds with the violent energy of two people who just fucking hate each other. Natsuo lashing a vicious kick at her former friend, which just finds its mark only for Sane to pivot at the last moment, sending the attack sailing past her. Sane blasting back with a counterpunch only to stop her fist at the last second and obscure Natsuo's vision with an open palm, drilling her with a brutal kick to the head, only for Natsuo to block Sane's attack and just smile. It is knife-edge tense, but as the fight drags on, Natsuo begins to feel Sane's resentment with each devastating attack, her old friend's hatred finally sinking in. And as it does, the panels start to bleed back and forth between the brutal violence and all Natsuo's memories that have brought them both to this point. How her desire to protect her brother led to even her own mother seeing her as this violent, unstable person. And how rather than push back on that perception, she's internalized it, becoming the monster everyone has started to see her as. And with that realization, finally, all the pain, all the isolation, it hits her. And it's only through recognizing this, she's able to start moving past it. Both in action and storytelling, this fight to me is one of the best I have ever read in manga, which is why it's such a shame that Tepu actually ends not long after this. Ota reportedly suffered major health issues during Tepu's publication, to the point that the series went on hiatus for 2 years right at the start of this fight. And while his health is obviously more important than anything, and he does conclude Tepu's main story, it does mean that some subplots are left hanging tantalizingly open. And unfortunately, he hasn't worked on anything since, aside from 2 Parasite side stories, which are actually awesome. But it is a shame considering not only how he really felt like he was coming into his own in the latter part of Tepu, but also in the power of the story he created up to this point. When I talk about fighting as a way to free yourself from your emotional garbage, that's what I see in Natsuo at the end of this fight. She doesn't feel like that violent person anymore. And don't get me wrong, she's still kind of a nightmare, but she's also formed real connections with the people at her gym and started opening up to those around her. And as we head into the final fight of the series, there's this feeling like, wow, she really has grown. That final fight being against the person we've been building to the entire story, Yuzuko. And we're not going to talk about that fight because I want you to go read this story for yourself. So I guess that's the end of the video. Goodbye! Friends, hope you enjoyed this video. Continue and would like to have you make more. Okay, no. We are going to end this video on the story of a big fight. Just not one that happened in Tepu or even in manga. This one took place in real life and brings together everything we've been talking about. The former champion
Oh,
of
Joanna John J.
US's
Chick.
strawweight division, a devastating outfighter technician who obliterates opponents with her long reach and razor-sharp strikes. And tonight, she faces the champion, Zhang Weilei, an explosive monster of raw power and speed that blasts through her opponents with sheer force, backed up by a vicious submission game, and currently on a 20-match win streak. The air is thick, the atmosphere tense. Both women need to win this fight. The match begins, and their initial exchanges are fast and brutal. Both fighters are aiming to end this fight quickly, trading devastating shots back and forth. And for a time, it seems even. But there's a difference. Out of the two, Waylay is by far the more powerful fighter, and as this becomes apparent, Jacek struggles to stand against the overwhelming onslaught of the champion. Even her very best strikes don't seem to even phase Waylay. The second round ending as the champion drives the challenger to the ground again and again. If this continues, Jacek's third round will be her last. But she perseveres, the two continuing to trade brutal shots back and forth. Their faces swell, their thighs redden, and something starts to shift. The invincible Waylay's movements become slower, less explosive. Her strikes weaker and more precise. The power that let her dominate the early rounds has now sapped her stamina, leading to a lack of aggression that lets Jacek stand back and pick apart the champion with precise, devastating strikes. Again and again, Waylay is tagged.
Wow, I can't believe he's talking about that. Well, either way, just like yesterday, it's going to be a short video. It's all the time I have for the day, unfortunately. And yeah, I'll be back on tomorrow to certainly finish off this one, start new ones, do all that other stuff. Thank you, Palvalent. I hope I'm saying that right. Uh, I hope you like. I do a lot of this stuff. I don't recognize the name, so maybe this is your first time stopping by. But a lot of my work is done in my sketchbook, where I'm doing pencil sketches, characters, props, environments, working on merch designs. Here's one that I haven't gotten back to in a while. And but as you can see, I'm always working on things like this. And yeah, always doing studies of things, stuff like that. Either way, if stuff like that seems to be interesting or up your alley, or just stuff that you relatively like and enjoy, feel free to subscribe, man, or follow, or whatever, whatever the thing is. Either way, I'm G Mr. Drew at G Mr. Drew on all social media. Follow, like, and subscribe. The links are in my bio, along with my website, gmrdrew.art. Check that out. It has all the work that I've ever done for like 20 plus years. And, you can see everything that I've done as far as like, digital stuff and traditional stuff and past works and things that go all the way back to like 1999 when I was like a little kid drawing pictures and whatever I could, whatever pieces I still have from that time. Obviously not a lot of it, but probably more than most. But yeah, check that stuff out. And other than that, man, I'll be back. I'll be back to, like I said, finish this and work on some more. Let's see what we have coming up. Like if I go, these are all references that I photo bashed together on Photoshop, I don't know, a couple months ago or something like that. So what I've been doing is going back and checking these out. So like the reference that I'm using, I photo bashed that and to be able to draw that. And then this is the one I'm working on now. All I did was zoom in on the face because there's no need to recapture the suit and all that other stuff. I already got it. So I just zoomed in on the face for this one. And that's the one that I'm working from. And then, yeah, tomorrow I'll be able to work on this one, which I really like. It's really dark. So I'll be able to go heavy with the inks. And then a couple of monster forms where the clothes are like ripping off and things like that. So yeah, man, we got some stuff to look forward to. Other than that, hope you guys enjoyed this one. On this particular video, give me a second here. On this particular session, I'm still trying to capture a little bit of what David Finch does while I watch him ink. He uses like a really small micro pen to outline his pencils and things like that, and then he just jumps in with a brush and starts inking heavy. I don't have that sort of technique. And there's things that I don't like to ink. Like you may notice I didn't get the chin over here, the top of the ear, the hair isn't closed off. There's things that I like to kind of leave untouched and you know, like the shoulders, the neck, all those things. Um, you know, he would probably ink those things, but I don't. Um, but still, I want to try to do what he does. So yeah, I just use a couple of micro pens, extra small, small. Use the small to outline the big globs. That way, when I go in with the brush pen, brushing the camera, sorry. That way, when I go in with the brush pen, at least I have like an outline to follow. So that way, I'm not like going crazy with it. But sometimes maybe I could afford to go a little bit crazier. This does look a little manicured. You know what I'm saying? Um, had I gone in with just the brush pen, it probably wouldn't look like that. So, you know, ups and downs. Like I said, it's little things like that that I want to figure out. Um, but you know, then the way that it came out on the eye here, I really like. So it's like didn't work so well for the cheek, maybe, but it really worked out well for the eye. And I just kind of got to figure out why that is and do better next time. So yeah, tune in next time. Love y'all. Peace.